Minister Punjab, Dr. Peter Chalk, esteemed guest speaker for the day, family members of Shri KPS Gill, serving and retired officers from the civil and police administration, invitees, ISB faculty, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen. A very good morning and a warm welcome to the second KPS Gill Memorial Lecture. The state of Punjab had suffered the excruciating pain of terrorism not very long ago. The response called for galvanizing the security apparatus into an active organic entity. In those volatile and uncertain times, Shri KPS Gill articulated a compelling vision and could command unflinching loyalty of his officers. It is in his honor and memory that this lecture series was instituted last year by Punjab Police. The initiative, which enters its second edition today, is also a tribute to this vibrant land and its resilient people. It is only befitting that today's chief guest is Captain Amarinder Singh, a persona with diverse experiences in uniform and outside it. He is widely respected for his zero tolerance towards terrorism. Mr. Gill would often find mention as his friend, and they shared common interests in literature and history. Sir, I deem it a privilege to welcome you today on behalf of the Punjab Police and thank you for gracing the occasion. When the unconventional becomes the new normal, it is bound to have a massive impact on our systems. So it has been with digitized hate, and India is no exception to this. Online radicalism is no longer a simple influencer of thoughts. It is, in fact, a silent script in which stories of terror and violence are being written today. It is invisible, nearly instant, and extremely convenient too. It is only apt that today's memorial lecture is being delivered by Dr. Peter Chalk, a counter-terrorism and security expert with the RAND Corporation USA, a non-profit policy think tank that helps improve decision-making through research and analysis. A hearty welcome to you, Dr. Chalk. We warmly welcome the family members of Shri KPS Gill for being with us today. We also acknowledge the valued presence of our special invitees and senior officers. I now call upon Mr. Dinkar Gupta, Director General of Police Punjab, to set the ball rolling for today's proceedings with his introductory remarks.
Honorable Captain Amarinder Singh Ji, Chief Minister Punjab, Dr. Peter Chalk, Mrs. KPS Gill, and other members of the family of Mr. Gill, distinguished members of the police, intelligence and security community present here today, my colleagues from the Punjab Police, ladies and gentlemen. It's my proud privilege to welcome you all to the second KPS Gill Memorial Lecture being held at ISB Mohali. And at the outset, I'd like to say a few words about Mr. Gill. I remember meeting him for the first time when I was at the National Police Academy, Hyderabad, in 1988. And one of our batchmates asked him, we were due back to come to Punjab for a district training. And he asked him where we would be posted during our district training. And Pat came the reply, without batting an eyelid, to the worst affected districts. He was an absolutely clear-headed man. And sure enough, I was posted in Amritsar when terrorism was at its peak, and my batchmates got posted to Gurdaspur and to Firozpur. And that posting helped me gain rich operational experience right at the beginning of my career. Mr. Gill was a great and a visionary leader. He had the broad chest of a leader as well as an extremely big heart. And each one of us who was working with him had the confidence that he would back us up fully whatever be the situation or the circumstances. I can never forget the day when he landed up in court number 1 of the Supreme Court in Delhi in full uniform in my support, even without being called. And he exuded such aura, such authority, that I still remember that there was a stunned silence in the courtroom for a while as he entered, much to the surprise of the lordships. I must also mention here that he never reprimanded us or ever asked us to do anything wrong. He let us get on with our jobs with minimal advice or counsel. Yet he had a solution for every issue if you went to him with a problem which needed fixing. Mr. Gill was also an operations man par excellence, with an acute and a natural sense of history. He was an original thinker as well as a practitioner on terrorism and counterterrorism in those times. And he had the rare ability to think big. When it was decided to end the president's rule in Punjab in 1991 and elections were announced to be held in February of 1992, he suddenly decided that every candidate who filled in his papers would be provided with one platoon of CRPF or the BSF for his security. He took this decision in the backdrop of the aborted June 91 elections, when almost about 27 candidates were killed by the terrorists. The decision seemed quite unimplementable and far-fetched at first, but when we got down to it, we found it could be done, and we managed to get the elections conducted without much violence, and we were able to protect most of our candidates in those 92 elections. Conceptualization and launch of the highly successful Operation Night Dominance in 92 was another example of his ability to think big. While he thought big, Mr. Gill was a man of few words, and at the same time, he had the ability to call a spade and would never known for mincing words. Thus, he could speak truth to authority and to the union governments of the day, both about the situation in Punjab as well as what needed to be done to set things right. Mr. Gill has left an indelible stamp on the Punjab Police, and it was primarily he who molded the Punjab Police into a fighting force, which could take on the full might of our inimical neighbor and its state-sponsored terrorists, and ultimately defeat their designs in a very comprehensive manner. The credit for making Punjab Police into the brand it is today largely goes to Mr. Gill. I am happy to report that the Punjab Police brand remains very strong even today, and I consider it my duty, as well as that of all the members of the 80,000 plus strong Punjab Police force, to keep the flag of the Punjab Police flying high. In the Punjab Police, we see the KPS Gill Memorial Lecture Series as an opportunity to expose our young police officers to the latest and contemporary thinking on terrorism and national security issues. And since Mr. Gill has become synonymous in our country with the fight against terrorism, we thought it would be befitting if we were to invite one of the world's foremost thinkers and writers on the subject of terrorism, violent extremism, insurgency, to deliver the KPS Gill Memorial Lecture, the second of the KPS Gill Memorial Lecture. We also thought that it would be best if the subject of the talk this year was relevant and topical to the security challenges before the border state of Punjab. Therefore, Dr. Chalk would be speaking on the dangers posed by online radicalization today. I'd like to share with you here today that during the last 4 years, starting 2016, more than almost about 60% of our terrorist modules, about the 31 terrorist modules we have busted over the last 2.5 years, almost about 60% were recruited, the members of these modules were recruited online. And today's generation is an online generation, and they consume most of their information as well as entertainment from cyberspace. Therefore, Dr. Chalk would be speaking on the dangers, as I said, posed by online radicalization. And as we all know, one of the major challenges before us today is to protect our gullible youth from the dangers of radicalization in cyberspace. This lecture series was started last year with the support and blessings of our Honorable Chief Minister, Captain Amarinder Singh. It is therefore befitting that he is amidst us today as the keynote speaker. In fact, the qualities in Mr. Gill that I just recounted apply equally to Captain Amarinder Singh, another leader par excellence. Under his leadership and with his active support, we will continue to reorient our police force to meet the emerging national security challenges, as well as the various issues and concerns of the citizens of the state. In the end, I would like to assure everyone present here today that the legacy of leaders like Mr. Gill will always go on, and all of us in the Punjab Police pledge to fight and protect the unity and integrity of our state and our motherland till the last drop of our blood. Jai Hind.
Thank you, sir, for setting the tone. Ladies and gentlemen, Captain Amarinder Singh, Chief Minister Punjab, needs no introduction. While we may be aware of his political journey, he had a distinguished career in the olive green too. After graduating from the NDA and the IMA, he served in the Sikh regiment and is a veteran of the 1965 war with Pakistan. An astute strategist and a thinker with deep understanding of the geopolitical landscape, he has written numerous books on war and history. It is my honor to request Captain Amarinder Singh, Chief Minister Punjab, to kindly deliver the keynote address.
Director General, officers, NGOs, and men of the Punjab Police. It's a pleasure for me today, an honor to be here this morning to speak about a great man, a man whose leadership was acknowledged the nation over, and who came to Punjab at a very difficult time. And to be present when an expert, an acknowledged expert of the RAND Corporation, Dr. Peter Chalk, is going to speak to us about what we are concerned today, extremism, terrorism, and radicalization through the social media, etc., which is of concern to us as it is to the whole country. While all of you have heard of Mr. KPS Gill's contribution, I'm going to leave the floor to Dr. Chalk to speak on the subject which he has posted today, and I want to just concentrate a little bit on a leadership, a man who gave this police the leadership required at a very difficult time. You all know what he did here. You've heard from your seniors, and particularly all of you who've joined after that period. But you must remember one thing, and which I want you to remember, because you're young men at the back who will one day head this force, that leadership starts at your level. And I'll tell you a story that in 1962, in the Eastern Theatre, in the Tawang area, Bomdilas, etc., we had one brigade which collapsed at Tawang. We had the second brigade which collapsed at Sela. We had the third brigade which collapsed at Bomdila. And the Chinese were poised to move into Tezpur. At that time, there was panic in Tezpur. The civil administration abandoned the field. People were running helter-skelter to get out of the way of what they thought the Chinese would come down into Tezpur. Just one man and his force stood and that was KPS Gill as a young SP. He didn't leave his position. He held his men together and he waited. What the outcome would have been, God alone knows. Because the Chinese called a unilateral ceasefire and the whole thing ended. But here was a man who was prepared to do his duty to the end. And I think that is where leadership really comes from. And it was that leadership over the years which finally brought him to head the Punjab Police at a very difficult time. It was a time most of you don't remember, but all your police stations shut at sunset. I remember once I was coming from Batala. Nobody used to be on the road. And really from Batala via Amritsar to Chandigarh, I didn't see one person on the road. We stopped, a colleague of mine was with me, who wanted to talk to the Deputy Commissioner. And we stopped at the Deputy Commissioner's house and the Deputy Commissioner's sentry wouldn't open the gate. So eventually the Deputy Commissioner was told that somebody was at the door. So they handed over at the gate the telephone. In those days you had the line telephone, and just handed over and the sentry said, "Ji, etthon hi gall kar lo." And that the Deputy Commissioner was spoken to and he said, "Sorry sir," and he knew that the person very well. And he said, "I'm sorry sir, but after sunset we don't open the gate." Now that was the fear that existed. And that time the Punjab Police was an old police forces used to be, trained for different purposes. They were there for maintaining law and order, directing traffic, and those sort of things. Nobody actually had really faced terrorism of the raw type. And that was when the situation developed as it did. Government of India posted Mr. Gill here, and he had the difficult task of putting this force back on its feet, rearming it, retraining it. But it was that leadership that did it. You remember those days. I think many friends are here in the front row, and I have my colleague here, Puran Dogra, he and I were both, he was Director General of yours later on, but we were together at the IMA, we were cadets together. So it was at that time that he emerged. He started that night dominance where there was fear to go in. He led the force through the villages. You remember the cordon and search operations. You remember it was done by the Punjab Police eventually. And the search was also done by the Punjab Police. And it was the army which held the outer cordon to get this. And eventually, the terrorists made some mistakes, which also helped us. They used to go into homes. They used to get the women there to prepare food for them, lay down their beds, and then they would rape their daughters. This was one thing which was spread through Punjab like wildfire and started turning the people against them. And then they did another thing. Whenever any wife or the person himself went shopping in town, the police officer, the NGO, whoever he was shot or she was shot. So that gave more courage to the Punjab Police. And knowing the psyche of the Punjabi, Mr. Gill worked on that and eventually brought the force to a point where this terrorism was beaten back. And we lost a lot of people. Over 1,700 Punjab officers, Punjab police officers and men were killed. Over 30,000 Punjabis died during their operations, during terrorist operations, or caught in the crossfire, or whatever it was. But 30,000 did die. But Punjab got peace again, so never again. This duty, which we will be told how this global terrorism is being met, and I'm sure Dr. Rand has something to say, Dr. Chalk, on something to say about us, because this is what the Rand Corporation does do. And I'm sure, and tell us something about what he believes what is going to happen here. But we have to be faced. We have to face up to these things. We have to remember this is going on. All of you know it. That is going on today, and we have to be prepared for it. We've got a hostile neighbor. and they continue their operations as we speak. And we have to be prepared for this. And this force is now prepared for it. You have been through the baptism of fire. And that baptism of fire is what puts a backbone into a person. And it's put the backbone into this force. And you must remember that you have to stand up for your country and for your state. And we have to never allow this state to ever be enmeshed or engulfed in that crisis that once spread over this place and made Punjab for 20 years a miserable place to live in. We've all been through it. As the DGP was just saying, 27 candidates were killed in that election. I was also in that election. And at 2 points there were ambushes laid for me too. It was just by God's grace that we changed our direction. I remember one, there was this very strict order. Each one of us were given one SP in charge. And my SP, it was the last, and we were told that before sunset, the elections had to, the campaigning had to stop. And this SP of mine, it was the last of the day. I think I had done about 18 or 19 visits to places. And it was the last moment in Dakala constituency where it was getting dark. And it was just turning right into a village from the main road, going to the village and coming out again and joining the main road again. And he stood in front of the car and he said, "You can't go." I said, "What difference does it make?" He said, "No, sir, you can't go. It's sun is setting, you have to go back." So I obviously was upset, but I said, now I have to come back all the way next day to this village. And next morning, the panchayat came and told me, lucky you didn't come, because at that final turning point, there was an ambush laid. The second one was in Hoshiarpur. I went to support one of my candidates, Balwant Sarhal, and as we had lunch together, and then I was going right to a village, and he said, "Can I just go left? I have to meet somebody and I'll catch up with you." I said, "Fine." So I went out of his right gate, and at the left gate, he was shot dead. And that was the way we were supposed to go. So these things kept happening, but some of us stood our ground. But that was because you had a man leading a force who made it sure that there was, I won't call it a bullet for bullet, but certainly a reaction to anything that happened, and a positive reaction to bring peace. So we are today remembering Mr. Gill, who's a household word, and he should be remembered all the time. One never forgets brave people. Good commanders are always remembered. Today you remember people from the First World War, Second World War. You remember Montgomery. You remember Field Marshal Slim. You remember Field Marshal Rommel, all of them who made a name for themselves in different parts of the world and many of them opponents. But they led their troops. And I think Mr. Gill led his troops. And we brought peace. Many of you served under him. I didn't. I consider it what should I say? It would have been an honor to have served under him. A leader like that, very seldom do you get leadership of that quality. And I knew him very well. I was very fond of him, and I think he was fond of me. And I today recollect my associations with him. And let him, for you, be that beacon that guides you in your lead as you go up in service. And one day, you too will, if you emulate him, you will be great officers and great NGOs of this very proud Punjab Police. I thank you all for calling me this morning, and I thank Dr. Peter Chalk, who has come all the way to give us his experience, and we look forward to it. I'm sure you all look forward to it, and so do I look forward to listening to him. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for highlighting what it takes to be a great leader. This will be a guiding light for our young officers. As for your word of caution, sir, On behalf of Punjab Police, I would like to assure you that while we hope for the best, we would certainly be prepared for the worst. It is now time to call upon Dr. Peter Chalk to deliver the second KPS Gill Memorial Lecture. However, before I do so, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce our guest speaker to this august gathering. Dr. Peter Chalk is an adjunct senior political scientist at the RAND Corporation in USA and a subject matter expert with the Institute for Security Governance. With special interest in Southeast Asia, he has analyzed such topics as unconventional security threats in Southeast and South Asia, evolving trends in national and international terrorism, among many others. He is the associate editor for Studies in Conflict and Terrorism, a reputed journal on international security issues. Dr. Chalk has regularly testified before the US Senate on issues pertaining to national and international terrorism. He has authored numerous publications on various aspects of low-intensity conflict in the contemporary world. With this short introduction, ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Dr. Peter Chalk.
Chief Minister, DGP Dinka Gupta, family members of KPS Gill, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I would like to sincerely thank the Punjabi Police for giving me the opportunity to present the second KPS Gill Memorial Lecture this morning. It will be a great honor to give this delivery. I first met DGP Gill in 2004, following a trip to Kashmir that a colleague of mine, Dr. R.J. Sani, who heads the Institute for Conflict Management, organized. At the time, I was struck by the enormous awe and presence that he admitted and the deference that he evoked in all those he came into contact with. I will never forget one dinner that I attended with the DPG where customers literally paved the way for him and his entourage to sit at prime tables reserved for honored guests at the renowned Bukhara Indian restaurant in Delhi. Although I unfortunately never had the opportunity to forge a close professional relationship with Mr. Gill, I'm fully aware of the contributions he gave to not only fighting and ending the Khalistani terrorist insurgency in Punjab, but also furthering intellectual thought and understanding of strategic crisis policing, both in India and more widely across the globe. And I should say at RAND, he was very well respected as a leader in these areas. I'm truly humbled to give this address and hope my remarks are worthy of this truly remarkable person. Before starting, I would like to give you a very brief overview of my background. As you have heard, I am an adjunct senior policy analyst with the RAND Corporation in Santa Monica, California. And for the past 14 years, I've also served with the Institute for Security Governance, which is an institutional capacity building organization that is based out of Monterey, California. My research during my professional career has focused on transnational security threats, or what I like to refer to as gray area phenomena. And I'll be coming back to that topic in a second. I've had a particular emphasis on insurgency, terrorism, violent extremism, armed maritime crime, piracy, and the illicit trafficking of people, weapons, and arms. I have studied and researched these issues on a global basis, though most of my emphasis has been on South Asia, Southeast Asia, and Sub-Saharan Africa. I've been privileged to work with some of the leading scholars in these various fields and fully acknowledge the importance of their experience in honing my own thoughts. Prior to my involvement with RAND and the Institute for Security Governance, I served as a senior professor of international relations at the University of Queensland in Brisbane, Australia. I earned my doctorate from the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, Canada, writing my thesis on the evolving dynamic of terrorism and counter-terrorism in the European Union. Besides my academic affiliations, I have acted as a specialist consultant for various national intelligence and security services around the world, and also have experience with the UK's armed forces, including a brief attachment with their commando force, the Royal Marines. I was born in Zimbabwe and have lived in England, Scotland, Canada, Australia, and now the United States, hence my rather unusual accent. My talk today will focus on the manner by which the internet and online social media platforms impact on processes of extremist radicalization. How virtual platforms have been used by terrorists and violent extremists in Pakistan and Afghanistan, the specific implications this holds for India's national security interests, and what regional remedial measures can be brought to best counter this growing threat. I should stress from the outset that the opinions and conclusions expressed in this talk are mine alone and do not reflect the opinions of the formal entities that I am associated with, namely RAND and the Institute for Security Governance, or any of the sponsors of their research. Before getting into the thrust of the presentation, I would like to say a few words about the nature of international security in the contemporary era. In stark contrast to the Cold War, few of today's dangers take the form of overt military aggression stemming from a clearly defined sovereign source. By contrast, conflict and general threat definition have become far more diffuse and opaque, lacking the simple dichotomies of the linear superpower division at the height of the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union. The challenges currently confronting the global community more often stem from non-state actors and non-governmental processes. They invariably transcend international boundaries. They blur the distinction between civil and military security. They frequently interact with one another to exacerbate their overall threat potential. And for the most part, they are not readily deterred by the traditional defences or borders that states have erected to protect both their populations and their territories. In the words of James Woolsey, the former director of the US Central Intelligence Agency, "We have slain a large dragon, but now we find ourselves living in a jungle with a bewildering number of poisonous snakes. And in many ways, the dragon was easier to keep track of." And these challenges are what I refer to, as I mentioned, as grey area phenomena. And there are several features of the present international environment that are contributing to the spread of this global disorder. First has been the emphasis on economic prosperity and power conceived in terms of wealth itself amplified by the severe wealth disparities that exist in many parts of the world. And this factor has led to the emergence of so-called black dollar organizations, entities seeking to satisfy their material aspirations on the back of sustained criminal enterprises. Second has been the resurgence of atavistic forms of ethno-national and religious identity, which has given rise to a dizzying array of highly fanatical movements that are quite prepared to shed blood in pursuit of their self-defined primordial interests. Third, the rapid expansion of international transportation links, communication networks, and financial flows. This has facilitated the transnational diffusion of security threats in such a way that novel and unanticipated hazards can quickly arise. And finally has been the growth of unsustainable so-called mega cities, which has contributed to environmental degradation, overpopulation, and pollution, as well as helped to spawn squalid shanty towns that have since acted as incubators for disease, crime, and violence. One of the more notable threat contingencies that has arisen at the top of this new security agenda is terrorism, which as a phenomenon has itself become a far more complex and multifaceted problem for a number of reasons. Numerous conflict zones around the world have provided extremist militants with multiple fronts to not only operate simultaneously, but also gain extensive first-hand combat experience. Globalization, modern means of communication, increasingly efficient transportation networks, and porous borders have all allowed terrorists to operate on a truly international basis. It has also contributed to the growing spectre of volunteer foreign terrorist fighters and facilitated the emergence of a new breed of violent extremist, the ad hoc amateur lone wolf, which I'll come back to in a moment. The proliferation of small arms and light weapons has provided terrorists and violent extremists with a range of tactical options that were formerly the reserve of governments and their armed forces. Somalia, Afghanistan, Nigeria, Yemen, Libya, and Mali are just a few examples where non-state actors have been able to elevate their attack tempos to the extent that they are now able to match, or in some cases even supersede, the actions of their sovereign adversaries. In many cases, militant extremists are increasingly looking to inflict death, not so much as a means of expressing identity, but more intrinsically as a way of creating it. More specifically, terror is now being used as an all-encompassing end in itself, with self-engorging and indiscriminate killing more the rule than the exception. And lastly, terrorists have become far more savvy and sophisticated in using information technology and online platforms to indoctrinate, to recruit, and to plan. And it is this last aspect that I would like to address this morning. Terrorists and violent extremists use the internet in much the same way as society as a whole does, to communicate, to collaborate, and to convince. Organizations such as Islamic State, what is now referred to as Al-Qaeda Central, Al-Qaeda Central's affiliates, Al-Shabaab in Somalia, Boko Haram in Nigeria, the Taliban in Afghanistan, and Lashkar-e-Taiba in Pakistan, to name but a few, are all organizations that have adroitly moved to exploit online forums and social media platforms to promote their ideologies, to justify their actions, to recruit foot soldiers, to condemn infidels, to inspire attacks, and to encourage lone wolf actions. Messages and missives are directed at multiple audiences, although it is youth that are most commonly targeted. And there are two reasons that account for this. First, teenagers and adolescents have a very heavy online presence. Second, they are highly susceptible to simplistic yet alluring extremist narratives that routinely emphasize parsimonious solutions to what, in reality, are highly complex problems. Al-Qaeda Central and Islamic State are exemplars of modern movements that have sought to leverage social media platforms as a means for simplifying the world and its complex human interactions to a single base denominator that is specifically tailored for youthful audiences. Although the two groups remain locked in a struggle for ideological supremacy, they have both put out a basic thematic message that stresses the following linear black and white reasoning. We are the righteous, the true and the prophetic. They are the Shia. They are the Crusaders. They are the Kafir. They are the Jews. Because we have religious legitimacy, it is our responsibility to destroy these non-believers and detractors. That is the message that they both put out. While currently most of the emphasis is on jihadist exploitation of the internet and digital social media, it would be a serious mistake to suggest that it is only violent Islamists that have embraced online platforms to foster radicalization. There are many other entities that have adroitly used these mediums for their own nefarious purposes, including pro-life militants, anarchists, black bloc anti-globalists, environmental and animal extremists, and white supremacists. The far right has been especially active online, and indeed many security agencies and research groups in North America, Australia, and Europe currently see the white supremacist and jihadi threats as two faces of the same coin. To give but two examples, in the US, where the Ku Klux Klan historically grew primarily out of personal connections and word of mouth, today's xenophobic extremists have mastered how to exploit the internet to reach, recruit, and coordinate among a huge pool of potential racists. And in the UK, the neo-Nazi group National Action was prescribed precisely because of its digital glorification of terrorism, which has been leveraged to build up a fan base through the use of explicit youth-oriented online material to reach new recruits and vulnerable audiences. So with that background, how then does the internet and associated social media platforms causally impact on processes of radicalization? I have about 7 or 8 germane factors here. First, information technology creates more opportunities for radicalization by breaking down traditional barriers of geography and space, allowing extremists to interact with what would ordinarily be unreachable target audiences in a real-time format. Numerous studies have shown how the internet serves as an accelerant for violent extremism in that it allows individuals to connect in an instantaneous and continuous way, effectively acting as a conveyor belt for incubating would-be terrorists. Second, social media platforms connect like-minded individuals and amplify their passions. Indeed, this is the core business model upon which these platforms are based. However, these interpersonal ties and linkages can also channel people into so-called echo chambers, where highly emotive content that would be otherwise deemed egregious or highly objectionable in the physical world gains a degree, if not full, acceptability in cyberspace. This self-bolstering dynamic plays an integral role in the reinforcement of extremist messaging, often at a rapid and extensive pace through the posting and reposting of individual tweets by hundreds of other users. Third, the internet can give the illusion of strength in numbers, where radicals brought together by online journals, blogs, service and chat rooms more easily see themselves not as individuals, but as an active part of a broader, networked extremist movement that operates nationally, regionally, or even internationally. Fourth, the internet ensures a degree of anonymity, something that is particularly true for sites that enable encrypted communications such as WhatsApp, Telegram, Kik, and Signal. This facet can encourage otherwise risk-averse individuals to engage in actions that they would not normally do in the physical world. More specifically, curious would-be militants may well feel more confident in approaching or contacting people of interest, i.e. terrorists, in the cyber world, largely because the initial risk of detection by authorities is low. Fifth, the internet offers a one-stop shop for all the information an extremist may need to carry out a violent action, from how to manufacture and place improvised explosive devices, or IEDs, to suggestions for alternative cheap methods of attack, such as the recent tactic of using cars, trucks, and vans as ramming weapons. The internet also promotes and publicizes ways of best announcing and publicizing a successful operation. In addition, it opens the way for so-called cyber coaching, allowing militant leaders to keep in near constant contact with attackers and to prod, encourage, guide, and facilitate their actions. Sixth, the internet allows individuals to access radical content and entities from the comfort of their own personal space without having to physically attend secret meetings at a prearranged meeting place. In so doing, it arguably enhances the potential for self-radicalization, where the entire process takes place online in the absence of any face-to-face contact. This potential gives rise to the spectre of lone wolf terrorism, again, which I'll come back to. Seventh, The internet and social media offer a cheap and effective propaganda capability, making it easy to not only disseminate information, but also to create and tailor messages that are directly geared to buttressing the militants' objectives. This facet reflects the basic fact that modern means of communication allow violent extremists to bypass established media outlets, meaning they are no longer dependent on communication mediums that in the vast majority of cases are vehemently opposed to their ideology and cause. Finally, the internet provides an online platform for infusing terror. By loading videos of highly destructive attacks and posting images that graphically depict how traitors will be dealt with, terrorists can leverage the virtual world to instill fear in enemy audiences and discourage moderates from speaking out against their actions. Multimedia content produced by Islamic State is a classic example of messaging, of this type of messaging at work. To reference one example, before the group captured the Iraqi city of Mosul in June 2014, Islamic State rolled out an extensive online campaign complete with text, images, and video that graphically threatened those living in Mosul with unparalleled death and destruction if they opposed and resisted Islamic State's entry into that city. Such intimidation was a deliberate tact designed to cower the urban population into submission and thereby minimize the likelihood of a local rejection of IS ideology and actions. Now, one common theme running through all of those 8 factors that I've emphasized is the notion of leaderless resistance, which has in varying ways come to characterize the organizational configuration of many terrorist movements in the modern era. First developed by Louis Beam, who was a Vietnam veteran and former Grand Dragon of the Texas cell of the Ku Klux Klan, the main aim of the concept is to base a group on so-called phantom cells that operate independently of one another, but which are able, through the combined force of their actions, to precipitate a chain reaction that eventually leads to a national or even global revolution. Information technology has been integral to the development of leaderless resistance by facilitating interactions between like-minded militants and providing a vector for circulating and distributing propaganda and information. Cyber-based mediums such as the internet, chat rooms, and online journals have all played a crucial role in ensuring that militant extremists are kept fully abreast of events, which has allowed for planned responses and attacks that are typically based on individual initiative. Used in this way, digitized communication technology has both overcome the tyranny of distance and obviated the requirement for orders and directives, thereby precluding the need for a physical group per se. The adoption of these amorphous and largely ephemeral linked structures marks a significant change in terrorist organizational dynamics, setting the US militia movement, European neo-Nazi organizations, anti-globalist radicals, and the global jihadist nebula apart from the more established militant groups of the past. In particular, they've played a pivotal role in fostering what is rapidly emerging as a new norm in violent extremism: homegrown lone actor terror. Although these individuals lack the training and resources and expertise to execute large-scale attacks against so-called strategic hard targets, they represent a unique and problematic policing challenge for at least 6 reasons. In many cases, lone wolves have no prior attachment to militancy and hence may only be peripherally known to law enforcement and intelligence agencies, if at all. This makes them very difficult to track, predict, and preempt. Lone wolves are potentially more prone to extreme acts of violence, as their activities are neither defined nor bounded by the organizational constraints that have historically been imposed on members of more structured groups. Third, the fluidity of lone wolves provides these individuals with the necessary latitude to initiate and develop independent operational strategies, an advantage that makes them more capable of coming up with new and unforeseen patterns of terrorist attacks. Fifth, while lacking the ability to decisively hit so-called hard targets, lone wolves are perfectly able to attack numerous civilian-centric soft venues that abound in modern societies, such as shopping malls, cinemas, buses, metro or train stations, restaurants, and even pedestrian pathways and roads. In so doing, they serve to greatly inflate the perceived threat of terrorism, as their actions are specifically and necessarily directed against sites, locations, and hubs that are integral to the day-to-day lives of ordinary citizens. And that is the intrinsic heart of the terrorist strategy. And finally, because lone wolves are not dependent on law enforcement authorities. So having given what is, albeit a fairly brief overview of the manner by which the internet and online platforms impact on processes of radicalization, what relevance and what context does that have for the Afghan Pak region? Oh. Okay. I nearly did, didn't I? Okay, hopefully no one's hacking in. A plethora of terrorist and violent extremist groups exist in the neighboring states of Pakistan and Afghanistan, operating across a highly fungible border area that the US State Department has repeatedly described as a crucible for global terror. Among the more prolific organizations centered in the region are Al-Qaeda Central, its affiliate Al-Qaeda in South Asia, the Taliban, the Haqqani Network, the Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan, or otherwise known as the Pakistani Taliban, Islamic State, Lashkar-e-Taiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed, Lashkar-e-Javangi, the Islamic Movement of Uzbekistan, and Jundala. These movements are all a product of the hardening of the religious divide that has occurred in South Asia over the past 20 to 30 years. Engaging in communal violence, bombings, drive-by shootings, kidnappings, and assassinations, and indiscriminate suicide attacks almost on a daily basis. Although undeniably violent, terrorist exploitation of online platforms in the Pakistan-Afghan region has historically not been extensive due to the low penetration of social media in this part of South Asia. Indeed, when the Taliban governed Afghanistan between 1996 and 2001, the internet, along with movies and photography, was totally banned on the grounds that it promoted, in the words of the Taliban, obscene, immoral, and anti-Islamic material. However, in both states, exposure to the internet has risen with the passage of time. In Pakistan, the rate of penetration has increased from only 15.5% of the population in 2017 to 22% in 2018 to as much as 33% in 2019. There are currently over 70 million broadband users in the country, and while the vast bulk of these people go online for purely innocuous reasons, there are growing indications that violent extremists and terrorists are using these same mediums to further their own logistical and operational designs. In 2017, a survey by the National Dawn newspaper in Pakistan found that 41 of 64 prescribed groups in the country, including sectarian, Islamist, and nationalist extremists, maintained an extensive presence on Facebook in an official or unofficial capacity. The site was variously being used to propagate militant ideology, to glorify fighters, to provide updates on a particular movement's activities, and to post pictures and videos. Some of the site's pages were organized by district or electoral constituency, and many were published in languages other than English, such as Urdu, Baloch, and Sindhi. That same year, the band Jamaat-ud-Dawa, which acts as the charity arm of Lashkar-e-Taiba, organized a series of social media workshops in Rawalpindi and Lahore to invite volunteers to join efforts in creating unrest in Jammu and Kashmir. Anti-Indian jihadist groups based in the region currently have more than 65,000 Twitter accounts and are actively working through encrypted sites such as WhatsApp to instigate unrest and riots in the valley. Significantly, these same platforms have been used to establish operational and logistical links with Al-Qaeda in South Asia. A Karachi-based affiliate of Al-Qaeda Central that was set up in 2014 to battle governments in Pakistan, Afghanistan, Myanmar, and Bangladesh in order to establish an Islamic State in South Asia. Telegram is another encrypted site that is increasingly being accessed in Pakistan. Islamic State first used the platform to officially confirm the establishment of its Khorasan province in Afghanistan and Pakistan under the command of Hafiz Saeed Orakazi on January the 11th, 2015, releasing a series of videos through its media office with the following pronouncement: "There is no doubt that Allah the Almighty blessed us with jihad in the land of Khorasan. All of this is for the sake of establishing Sharia. Know that the Islamic Caliphate is not limited to a particular country. These men will fight against every disbeliever, whether in the west, east, south, or north." Since then, Islamic State has adopted Telegram to target and recruit university students and professionals who are increasingly being groomed as a mainstream membership element, including doctors, engineers, lawyers, journalists, and businessmen. They have also used Telegram to announce responsibility for major attacks that have taken place inside the country, such as the suicide bombing of the government hospital in Quetta on August the 8th, 2016, that left more than 70 dead and another 130 injured. And Telegram has been used to verify tactical and transactional partnerships that have been forged between Islamic State and Lashkar-e-Javangi and other local groups such as Al-Alami, Lashkar-e-Islam, and Jamaat-ul-Ahari. The Pakistani Taliban is another group that has leveraged Telegram, in this case to claim responsibilities for bombings, to share tactical information, and to facilitate the dissemination of electronic publications. In this latter respect, the group has increasingly focused its attention on exploiting Telegram to radicalize young women, using the site to launch an online magazine in 2017 that calls on females to join the ranks of the Mujahideen and to learn how to use combat weapons such as grenades and assault rifles. The Pakistani Taliban's emphasis on women reflects a growing appreciation of the operational, logistical, and psychological benefits this particular demographic has to offer. Females can more easily penetrate targets than men, largely because modesty in the Muslim religion precludes more concerted body checks on them. Women provide a critical support base as financiers and propagandists, and females and attacks carried out by women generally generate a higher shock value, as females are typically viewed as preservers rather than takers of life. In a more general sense, the internet has helped to fundamentally transform the perceived nature and character of the typical militant in Pakistan. As Bruce Hoffman, a senior fellow for counterterrorism and homeland security at the Council on Foreign Relations and a very close personal friend and colleague of mine, has observed, the past stereotype of a jihadist from the mountains in traditional garb with bandoliers of ammunition slung over his shoulder has been replaced. The new generation consists of well-educated, cosmopolitan, university-taught Pakistanis drawn from middle-class backgrounds who can navigate our globalized society, whether virtually or physically, with ease and confidence. Although not as extensive as Pakistan, internet access in Afghanistan has also shown a demonstrable increase in recent times, rising from just 6% of the population in 2013 to 17.5% in 2019. There are now well over 55 internet service providers in the country with over 5 million users. And again, at least some of this online presence has been tied to terrorist and violent extremist groups, including the Taliban, Islamic State, and Al-Qaeda Central. Since being forcibly removed from power in 2001, the Taliban has systematically moved to expand its leverage of information technology, increasingly viewing virtual platforms as a highly conducive forum from which to launch so-called electronic propaganda warfare. The Taliban currently possesses several internet domains, although the main one is Al-Amara. The site is not interactive, mainly acting as a one-way dissemination tool. It is published in Pashto, Dari, Urdu, Arabic, and English, which allows the group to target a variety of audiences locally, regionally, and internationally. The Taliban also makes extensive use of social media to distribute videos, films, and electronic propaganda to countless Afghan cell phones at a time, as well as to maintain contact with journalists, much of which is orchestrated through outlets such as Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. The movement has established an online media committee to oversee this effort and has reportedly set up a professional production studio called Al Shahamat to generate digital content. These same sites are used to reach foreign financiers and sympathizers and to communicate with sister groups in other parts of the world. Since commencing operations in Afghanistan in 2015, Islamic State has used hundreds of fake accounts on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram to find recruits, promote the group's ideology and propaganda. These efforts have borne dividends and are generally thought to have played a significant contributory role in helping to build an active multinational membership that is now conservatively numbered to be between 3,500 and 4,000 fighters in Afghanistan. Islamic State has also leveraged the internet and social media platforms to inspire, direct, and authorize autonomous cell and lone wolf attacks in the United States and the West. One widely publicized such example was a preempted plot in 2016 that was to have involved coordinated suicide bombings and indiscriminate shooting attacks in New York's Times Square. For its part, Al-Qaeda Central has used the internet and social media platforms to tap into the plethora of local grievances that abound in Afghanistan, ranging from physical insecurity to government corruption, poverty, and growing social inequality. It has used social media platforms to tap into those grievances and incorporate them into a wider, all-encompassing Islamist narrative aimed at furthering popular legitimacy and justice. Mimicking similar efforts in countries such as Yemen, Syria, Libya, Turkey, and Pakistan, the ostensible aim has been to generate and solidify a unique so-called glocal self-identity that is now emerging as the foundation for an all-encompassing grand strategy to guide Al-Qaeda Central's evolving operational trajectory, both in Afghanistan as well as other key theaters around the world. So what are the implications for India of all this? And this is where I think most of your interest will lie. Well, certainly terrorist and violent extremist use of the internet and online platforms in Pakistan and Afghanistan has direct relevance for the national security interests of this country. As I've already noted, Twitter is already being used to promote riots and protests in Kashmir. And now that the province has been stripped of its special autonomous status, groups such as Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed will doubtless seek to escalate the tempo of this unrest through other online platforms. In addition, Islamabad's Inter-Services Intelligence Directorate, the ISI, which has a long history of backing anti-Indian outfits operating in Kashmir, may well leverage encrypted social media sites, secure communication platforms, and online mapping technology to covertly facilitate jihadist recruitment drives or directly support terrorist strikes in the region. And the 2008 Mumbai massacre, which resulted in 164 fatalities and over 300 injuries, is germane in this regard. The perpetrating group is now widely believed to have been the Kashmiri-based militant outfit Lashkar-e-Taiba. And the ISI is generally thought to have been the key supporting agency that bankrolled and guided the attack. Notably, the 10 terrorists who conducted the operation received orders from their handlers in Pakistan via voice over the internet service provider phone services, and they were able to quickly navigate their way to targets across the city with the assistance of digitized Google Earth images that were electronically transmitted from Islamabad. Ominously, a high-level meeting between the ISI and various terror groups took place in Islamabad earlier this year, during which a plan was reportedly fleshed out to conduct fresh attacks in Kashmir and other parts of the country. Among those in attendance were representatives from Jaish-e-Mohammed and Lashkar-e-Taiba. The former, JEM, was behind the 2019 Pulwama attack that left 44 police reservists dead, while, as noted, the latter is widely believed to have been the entity responsible for the 2008 Mumbai atrocity. Should another incident on the scale of either of these two events occur, it could trigger a severe Indo-Pak standoff that, if not carefully managed, could quickly escalate to the level of a major military confrontation between the two nuclear-armed states. Because information technology has been so integral to the genesis of leaderless resistance, which I've noted, which as an organizational construct has as much relevance for extreme Islamist movements as the far right, it could also be effectively used to inspire and endorse militant strikes by lone or semi-independent actors in India. Working from its enclaves in Afghanistan, Islamic State has been doing this for some time with regards to attacking the United States, and there is no reason why similar action could not be taken that targets prominent cities in India such as Delhi, Mumbai, Bangalore, Chennai, and Ludhiana. The virtual links that Al-Qaeda in South Asia has established with Kashmiri militants could also serve as a medium through which to encourage and instigate attacks in northern India. Undertaken as part of the overall objective to establish a Muslim state in South Asia, this would conceivably be of considerable interest to Al-Qaeda Central, as it would signify the effective Islamicization of a conflict that has long acted as a major thorn in Delhi's side. When taken in the broader context of Al-Qaeda in South Asia's growing ties to the Taliban and the group's increasingly explicit moves to hijack the rapidly expanding Rohingya crisis in Bangladesh and Myanmar, this would represent a major surge in Al-Qaeda Central's regional operational capabilities, directly threatening the stability of India's wider geostrategic neighborhood. Such a scenario could become a real possibility should a US troop drawdown occur in Afghanistan, something that President Trump has repeatedly called for. This would create a void that terrorists and violent extremists would no doubt quickly seek to fill by leveraging instruments of both physical and cyber power. And finally, and to bring the threat dimension back down to the local level, an intensive social media effort aimed at radicalizing young Sikhs is currently being waged by pro-Khalistani militants based in Pakistan and diaspora groups operating out of the United States, the UK, and Canada. There are growing indications that the ISI is orchestrating much of this activity as part of a wider campaign to co-join instability in Punjab with unrest in Kashmir. Indeed, the terror conference that I referenced several minutes ago, that the ISI organized in Pakistan, also included leading members of the Khalistani Zindabad force, which is banned in India and the European Union as a terrorist organization, and which, according to intelligence sources in Delhi, was strongly urged to make their operational channels available for facilitating attacks across India as a whole. So what can we then do to counter this growing threat? What can South Asia do? Action in this area will require governments, civil society groups, and the private sector to join and collaborate in fine-tuning best practice solutions. Thus far, most of the focus has been on introducing legislation and initiatives that allow governing authorities to identify, block, and quickly delete any malignant electronic information that is deemed to pose a national security risk. And I'm going to contextualize these responses back to Pakistan and Afghanistan, as those were the countries that I was highlighting in terms of the exploitation of internet. In Pakistan, a series of laws are in place to prevent the misuse of the internet and social media platforms, including the Prevention of Electronic Crimes Act, the Anti-Terrorism Act, the Fair Trial Act, and the National Plan for Countering Terrorism and Extremism. Islamabad has also implemented measures for bottom-up social media monitoring, introducing a digital portal and mobile app called SafeSurf to encourage internet users to anonymously report any extremist or online hate content that they come across. Now, while these measures may work to temporarily disrupt the propaganda, recruitment, and operational activities of terrorists and violent extremists, they are essentially stopgap remedies that militants can quickly overcome by switching to other platforms, communicating through voice over the internet provider services, accessing virtual private networks, opening new accounts, or simply operating through proxies. These initiatives may also merely serve to drive militants further underground, whereby they seek refuge in the so-called dark web, where they are effectively beyond the reach of any formal monitoring mechanisms. Just as importantly, approaches along these lines have very real implications for three intrinsic values that most democratic nations hold as sacrosanct: freedom of speech, the right to privacy, and net neutrality. Pakistan's Prevention of Electronic Crimes Act, which was introduced in 2016, is a case in point. The legislation has been widely criticized for containing poorly defined terminology as to what constitutes cyber terrorism, how this differs from cyber crime, and what mechanisms are in place to ensure any censoring activities are necessary and enacted for the greater public good. When Islamabad used the act to block Telegram in 2017, a widespread popular backlash ensued, with many Pakistanis complaining that their right to private online access had been violated. A more holistic and effective response would involve directly intervening in the process of radicalization, bringing communication experts and civil society groups together to develop and execute alternative messaging campaigns that credibly challenge the foundations of terrorist propaganda are essential to this effort, as is promoting awareness and education among the youth so they can make critical and informed choices about what they see and read online. To the extent possible, these should be run as government-independent programs, as lessons, both good and bad, from the UK, France, Saudi Arabia, Singapore, and Indonesia, among others, have all shown that this is the best way of maximizing the prospects that these initiatives will be viewed as unbiased and neutral in terms of content and direction. The UK's Prevent programme is a case in point. Instituted as an integral component of the country's counter-terrorism strategy, otherwise known as Contest, It is essentially aimed at preempting vulnerable populations from being radicalized and drawn into violent extremism. Part of this endeavor involves the use of grassroots organizations, specialist public relations agencies, and media companies to develop online and offline alternative and counter narratives that are then directed at those deemed to be most at risk to terrorist indoctrination and recruitment. However, overseeing much of this effort is a secretive government department called the Research, Information and Communications Unit, RICU, the activities of which for many years was kept from public scrutiny. When investigative journalists revealed the extent of RICU's behind-the-scenes role, Prevent's strategic communication effort suffered a serious setback, simply because it could no longer be presented as an independent, community-based campaign. It is crucial that efforts to develop cogent and consistent alternative and counter narratives on the internet are accompanied by corresponding measures taken in the physical world. There are numerous places of religious worship and instruction in Afghanistan and Pakistan that exist in the absence of any official control and which have been tied to inflammatory preaching and teaching of the sort that fans the ardor of violent extremism. The hate-laden public sermons and lectures put out by these ostensibly legal organizations needs to be checked, if not entirely eliminated, as in many cases they eventually find their way onto social media platforms in the form of brazen video messages and clips. Again, it is vital that any action taken in this area emanates from accredited, locally respected and independent religious scholars and community elders. If there is even a slight suspicion that moderate messaging is being controlled or directed by the government, its overall credibility is likely to be seriously jeopardized. In all cases, timing is key. There is often a very brief window of opportunity to positively influence an individual who has exhibited an initial interest in extremist ideology. If the intervention comes after a decision has been made to join the cause or commit a violent act, it will almost certainly be too late. Research conducted in Europe and Asia has consistently shown that when jihadists began planning their trips to join the Taliban, Al-Qaeda Central and Islamic State in Syria, Iraq and Afghanistan, they were too far down the extremist path to receive, much less accept, any new information that was presented to them as to why they should not go. Tech companies, both big and small, must also move to proactively champion digital resistance by ensuring that condemnations, refutations, and alternatives to terrorism are sufficiently present and accessible online. Ad targeting, which is one of Google's most effective marketing technologies, could be leveraged to ensure that these messages and missives are consistently pushed to online users who exhibit traits that may abet vulnerability to radicalization. And finally, there is room for developing responses that have a more tactical and strategic bent, especially in the short term. Police forces, spy agencies, and service providers could all usefully exploit the online interactions of terrorists and other violent extremists to gain intelligence on their activities and gather evidence that can then be used for prosecutorial purposes. This is reportedly one of the methods that is being used and explored by the Afghan government and the international community to track the communications of the Taliban. If developed adroitly and with due consideration for oversight and accountability, Such interventions could pay dividends in terms of blunting violent online logistical and operational designs. Ladies and gentlemen, digitization represents one of the modern world's most liberating innovations. It is essential that this communication tool is used for the purpose it was created, to promote knowledge, debate, discussion, and inclusivity, rather than subverted to sow the seeds of intolerance, hatred, and violence. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chalk, for a well-researched and educative talk. Your talk has clearly highlighted the amplified impact of information technology, especially social media platforms being used to communicate, collaborate, and convince. It brought out the irrelevance of geographical borders in the age of internet. It is said geography has become history in the world of internet. The policing challenges that this new reality has thrown up, especially the threat from lone wolves and increasing efforts to reach and recruit women by terrorist organizations, has been lucidly brought out by you. The virtual world is indeed a real-world issue for security professionals, and especially the challenges that we face in India. Your talk had the rare timber of wide experience and strong pitch of academic research. Your suggested roadmap for response will surely help us in taking informed decisions. Thank you once again. Ladies and gentlemen, the floor is now open for an interactive session. I would strongly urge you to please keep your questions short and crisp. I would also request you to desist from asking supplementary questions so that other members of the audience get an opportunity to ask theirs.
Channel interview, he said, he quoted the missile attack on oil installation in Saudi Arabia. He said Pakistan needs to do something like that. Can you please elaborate, if you have some inside information, or your in-depth analysis of the missile attack on Saudi Arabia, allegedly by Iran, which has been denied, or by Yemen, whatever it is. Can we be little more information on it?
Thank you for the question. I don't have too much insight on that specific announcement that was made in Pakistan. But I would imagine the context for this is that attacking oil infrastructure, which is vital to any modern society's economy and development, is an effective asymmetric way of dealing with an adversary. We've seen it not only with the alleged Iranian attack in Saudi Arabia, but certainly with Al-Qaeda Central and its consistent emphasis on attacking oil infrastructure in the Gulf of Aden as a way of bringing the United States and its Western allies to their knees by hitting the economy. And generally, when we're looking at modern manifestations of terrorism today, an increasingly important component of that, particularly with respect to Islamist-inspired terrorism, is the economic dimension. So I would imagine the notion here is that Pakistan should start aiming at India's national economy, its infrastructure, its critical infrastructure, as I said, as a way of asymmetrically weakening the state. And those sorts of attacks can definitely be carried out by deniable proxies without the direct involvement or servitude of a sovereign entity behind them.
To ask, sir, what are the technological advances to monitor and keep a tab on such vicious communication, especially the role of the artificial intelligence, if any? Thank you.
Thank you again. There have been advances in information technology and artificial intelligence that can be specifically used to monitor online content and those who are accessing it. And certainly there are encryption tools and monitoring tools that private companies like Google have developed to do this. The problem is convincing these internet service providers to work closely with government. In many cases, they do not like to be associated with government efforts, largely because they see this as threatening the concept of net neutrality, which I mentioned in my presentation. But it is vital that we get the high-tech companies involved in this effort, because ultimately they are going to be the front line in terms of safeguarding the internet. It's been hit and miss, certainly in the United States and in Western Europe, as to getting this integrated, coordinated strategy across. It's early days, but there are indications that groups such as YouTube, Google, WhatsApp are all coming to the table now, realizing that the more that their platforms are subverted for extremist purposes, the less credible those platforms will be in the eyes of the public at large. And you've also got to remember that terrorist use of the internet is minuscule compared to wider society. So the high-tech companies have a vested interest in ensuring that the message
after 20 days, 3rd December was a memorial lecture on Mr. Gill. And on 22nd of December, I was told that there was a drone attack on England, next to one of the big airports. Then Venezuela president also was attacked. And now drones have come out in our areas also, and sniper. So I would just request through Mr. Parks that could you give the Punjab government some, Mr. Gupta especially, how do we contain the drones and sniper? Because mainly our security, leaving aside the CM security, the peripherally security is very, very weak as per my assessment. What do you tell us that how do we keep peripherally security and drones from keeping out of the way? I am also related to Mrs. Gill. Mr. Gill had given me a big appreciation letter also when I was the State Home Minister. Mr. Rana, his son, had given. I had developed the first bulletproof vehicle in 88-7. Mr. Gupta came in 88, 87 and dedicated that to the Punjab Police. And dog squad through Mr. Amarinder Singh, DGP now, through him I made him the nodal officer for that. First it used to go to the ticket pool. So I will just request you that tell us something about drones and sniper attacks which don't require any information and taking into the security. Secondly, sir, that what is the way we can intrigue into the terrorist network in America, which is number one is the technology, or number two, it is finances, or number three, any other. How can we intrigue our intelligence in the terrorist network on monetary or on economic? Where does America get its information from technology or information number one? Thank you.
To counter, particularly if they are carried out by lone wolves, for all the various reasons that I mentioned. In many cases, these individuals are not known to law enforcement authorities. They have no pattern of operations. Sometimes they just wake.
अच्छा यार जैमर ना दिक्कत कर रहा है जेडे वायरलेस माइक है ना प्रॉब्लम आ रही है फ्रीक्वेंसी कट हो गई नहीं ना वायरलेस दूसरी चाहिए बाहर वाले माइक के जैमर लगा वो दूसरी चाहिए तो या तो वो ओपन करनी है या वो फ्रीक्वेंसी देना या तो वो फ्रीक्वेंसी बैंड ओपन करके आई गई है फिर तो वो भी चलनी नहीं चाहिए उन्हें ना और मारी है हाँ एवं चाहिए या तो पहले वो होना चाहिए और बाहर मारी कोई वायरलेस चला आवाज आ रही है अंदर आवाज आ रही है अंदर की भी आ रही है तो यार वायरलेस माइक है ना मेरे अपने वो फ्रीक्वेंसी पीछे जैमर लगा हुआ है अच्छा वो करके दिक्कत कर रहा फ्रीक्वेंसी मैं वो कट कर रहा हूं मैं क्या सीगा वो कर नहीं रहे हाँ मोबाइल की फ्रीक्वेंसी वो करना बाकी मेरा फ्रीक्वेंसी मोबाइल तक होता है साडी लाइव मशीन ਦਾ ਵੀ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਹੈ ਸਾਡੀ ਲਾਈਵ ਮਸ਼ੀਨ ਨਹੀਂ ਚੱਲ ਰਹੀ ਕਿਤੇ ਲਾਈਵ ਕਰਨ ਵਾਲੀ ਮਸ਼ੀਨ ਨਹੀਂ ਚੱਲ ਰਹੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਚੱਲ ਰਹੀ ਉਹ ਜੈਮਰ ਦੀ ਦਿੱਕਤ ਹੈ ਯਾਰ ਜੈਮਰ ਲਗਾ ਹੋਇਆ ਹੈ
Yes, please. Please wait for the mic and I'll request you to introduce yourself.
So my name is Sohail and I'm a trainee IPS officer. In the first place, I would like to acknowledge that it was a sheer pleasure to listen to you for past 1 hour, and certainly I have added value to myself. Sir, my question is that as police officers, law remains a very important tool in our hands to tackle the menace of digital hate and online radicalization. But sir, sometimes the legal measures, they either are inadequate and some other times they may not be feasible. So sir, in such a situation, other than legal measures, what other institutional and social apparatus can be employed by a police officer to deal with the menace of digital hate and online radicalization? Sir? Thank you, sir.
out that did actually provide a consistent, positive, thematic message to counter those narratives. But as soon as it was discovered that RICU, that government entity, was directing that effort, the whole thing fell apart. And it has now been vigorously criticized by community groups, NGOs, human rights organizations, you name it, because it's all seen as part of the government. It's now being portrayed as a government-led initiative to basically restrict access online. So community, but independent.
So,
Thank you for that question. Yeah, echo chambers, that's exactly what platforms such as Twitter, YouTube, Google are all based upon. And it does automatically connect like-minded individuals. And it's the basis of where they make their money. Now, you're right, we're not going to be able to suppress that using laws because it's against the commercial interests of the internet service providers themselves. And they are going to have to actually be vigilant and consistent enough to apply those regulations. I think a far better solution is to get the ISP providers themselves to work in tandem and collaboration with the government to develop those platforms. But as I mentioned earlier on, in many cases, these service providers don't like the government. They don't like to be seen to be doing the work of the government because that threatens their commercial power. I don't have a very good answer for you as to how we get around that problem, but there have been a lot of efforts, or a lot of nascent efforts, I should say, and certainly in the United States, of looking at potential ways of creating sort of what is referred to as a cyber reservist force that brings into play elements of the commercial sector working in tandem with the government to develop these more consistent digitized filters that can help suppress the algorithms that actually make the internet so conducive to connecting individuals from all over the place. There was a second part of your question right at the end. I can't remember what it was. I absolutely agree with you. There has to be a moral dimension to this, but unfortunately, in the commercial world, money is everything, and often that comes at the expense of moral considerations. But as I said, there are these efforts of creating the so-called reservist cyber force, and I would urge you, if you're interested in that, as just to you can learn more about it on the website for Georgetown University by another colleague of mine, Dan Byman, who actually developed the concept and who's now trying to initiate it and expand it into the government's toolkit to counter online radicalization and extremism. I remember what you did say was about self-radicalization. There is that potential, but to date, there hasn't been any known cases where an extremist has been completely self-radicalized. There has been at least some element of either verbal or face-to-face communication. Many researchers and analysts do not think that the entire radicalization process can take place purely online. There has to be some other aspects involved that involves at least some direct communication. That may change, but at least up to this point, we haven't seen that, pure aspect of the lone wolf, if you like.
The lady there, please. The lady, sir? Sir? Sir?
Offensive cyber? You've got to be careful here because the last thing you want is to provide Pakistan with ammunition that it routinely puts out, that it is the victim of Indian instigated terrorism or proxy warfare. I think that the best offensive mechanism here is working in collaboration with your international partners, of which there are many, developing means to convince the Pakistani government that this whole notion of using proxies and differentiating between good and bad proxies as an instrument of foreign and defense policy is a no-winner. I would urge diplomacy over violence or over kinetic action, developing norms in collaboration with India's geostrategic partners, putting pressure on Pakistan to put pressure on the various militant groups that are operating in Pakistan, and to try and stress upon the government that these organizations, if not managed and controlled, could pose as much of a threat to Pakistan as they do to other neighboring countries. And we've seen that in terms of attacks that have been instigated by groups such as Jaish-e-Mohammed, JEM, which was basically a creation of ISI, but which has carried out some pretty bloody attacks in Pakistan itself. Pakistan needs to be made aware of that. I thoroughly agree, yes. As I mentioned in my talk, timing is key. Once an individual has been radicalized, it is extremely difficult, or once they've become convinced of the veracity of an extremist message, it becomes very, very difficult to convince them that that is the wrong way of going about their activity. It is much better to get these messages out to target populations that haven't been radicalized but are certainly seem to be vulnerable to radicalization, and to target those populations. That's why I mentioned ad targeting from Google is a very effective tool that could be leveraged in that manner. But you have to remove those that sense of injustice, marginalization, marginalization, as I said, in the first place. So anything that you're doing to develop credible counter-narratives, again, goes back to what I was saying, got to be government independent. You have to get social groups on board, you have to get community groups on board, you have to get the service providers on board. And I do agree that intervening prior to the process of radicalization is the best way of going about this. In the same manner as we see in countering violent extremism in general, CVE work, in places like Yemen and Somalia. The most effective efforts have been those that have been carried out on the ground by respected NGOs and community groups that are not seen to be enemies of the government, agents of the government. And to me, that is the most effective way of going forward.
We may have time for one or two more questions. So in case you have a question, please raise your hands so that I can. Okay. Thank you, please. Yes, please. And please keep your questions short. Thank you. Sir, could you please specify your question? I mean, we have.
Okay, China's de-radicalization policies, for me, are a travesty. What they're doing with the Uyghurs in Xinjiang is tantamount to an internment policy. The US has actually now announced sanctions on individual members of the Chinese government in direct response to those detention and internment camps. It is not credible, it is not effective, and it is just serving to further amplify perceptions of injustice and marginalization amongst ordinary Uyghurs. The US, I do agree, it's played a double game with Pakistan. The US has certainly seen the strategic value of Pakistan when it comes to its efforts in Afghanistan and what Pakistan can provide. It has been not particularly adroit or effective in terms of cracking down on Pakistan's pretty blatant use of terrorism as a tool of statecraft. But the US has done that, it's doing it with Saudi Arabia right now. I can't talk for the US government, but it's the world of realpolitik. And when it comes to things like national security, the interests of the state, terrorism, counterterrorism, you see it amongst a lot of countries where they'll play a double-edged sword. I'm not saying it's right, I'm just saying that's the reality.
Could you please pass on the mic? Mr. Olak had a question, and then the lady in Cairo.
Yeah, you bring up a very good point. Obviously, these groups, whether they're local community-based groups, if they are seen to be making inroads and effective ways of credibly debunking extremist narratives, those militant organizations are going to see them as prime adversaries. In many cases, I've worked with some of these groups, particularly in places like Bangladesh, in Yemen, and in Somalia, and it hasn't detracted from their ardor in terms of actually stepping up their efforts to counter militant activities, both online and offline. And I think that my only answer to you is that we need to have faith in these organizations, in NGOs, in community-based organizations, that they will not be deterred from doing their work, even if it makes them more liable to being attacked, because there have been many places in the world where they show a remarkable sense of bravery in light of these adversarial actions. But it is an issue, and I fully acknowledge it. And it's one of those sort of conundrums that we do need to deal with when we're looking at sort of CVE work in general.
The lady there, and then Mr. Arora.
My name is Neha Kataria, and I'm working in counterintelligence wing. So my question, with your experience and research work with different countries and their laws, what will you be suggesting or giving solutions? What solutions or suggestions will you be giving to our government regarding the topic in discussion and the right to privacy and freedom of speech?
Thank you. Well, I certainly would not deem myself in the position of giving advice to your government. Your government knows the situation in India far better than me. However, but looking in general sense, I think any form of counterterrorism, public relations is number one. If the public does not view what is being done as effective, credible, and in the greater public good, they will not accept it. And in a democracy, that means that any legislation or that is put on the books will not gain the degree of public legitimacy that is necessary for it to pass. So any action, it needs to be transparent, it needs to be accountable. That's another aspect here. There have to be sufficient checks and balances on the executive to ensure that what may be legitimate counter-terrorist responses are not subverted for other reasons, such as quietening or dampening legitimate political opposition. So transparency, accountability, and credibility. Those are the three basic corners of any successful counter-terrorist strategy.
Mr. Suresh Arora, please. Can you please get the mic back? I'll come to you thereafter. Yes.
Knowing the vulnerability of Punjab, like we are in the neighborhood of J&K, and of course Pakistan has specific interest in Punjab. To sum up the today talk, what would you suggest as step 1, 2, 3, which Punjab police need to take? Simple. Thank you.
Well, I think that it's the same as I've stressed on the national level, but just at a local level. So, again, there has to be this effort at building communal resilience. within the Punjabi population as a whole, using the population as a tool by the state government itself to help authorities identify potential extremists who may be showing signs of radicalization, to work with the community for strengthening the resilience of the community to withstand those sorts of pressures. And even at the local level, I think that there can be greater efforts aimed at trying to put across the message that the Pakistani way of going about sort of furthering its strategic interests by using proxies as a explicit form of statecraft is a no-winner. So basically the same things that I've been saying at the national level, I think can be applied at the local level as well.
Well, you get the opportunity to ask the last question.
Dr. Peter, it was a pleasure as a civilian to listen to your experience, and it's like an eye-opener for a civilian like me. My question is that you talk about the social challenges, the internet challenges which the governments face from all these terrorist organizations. Do you think it's sometimes not necessary for the governments to react sharply to these kind of social messages which are passed on internet or through Facebook? Like, I'll give you an example. I asked Mr. Gill once I said it was a concern from my side that when I drive, sometimes I see these billboards and pictures of militants on the back windows or on the signboards of a lot of highways. So I said, what is your thought on that? So he said it's better to have a picture of a militant than holding a gun in your hand. So it's better not to react sometimes to such pictures and these kind of informations passed. What is your thought on that?
Thank you for your question. I think reaction can be have very negative effects, particularly if it's an overreaction. And of course, that's what terrorists are aiming to do, to spark overreaction on the part of the state, which can then be used to justify why they are doing what they are doing and to attract recruits. So whenever you develop a counter-terrorist response, it has to be proportionate to what you're trying to counter. It cannot be disproportionate. And it also has to be explained to the public as to why you're doing it and how it is actually contributing in a positive way to the overall counter-terrorist mission. And that applies not only to initiatives that have relevance in the cyber world, but also in the physical world. So measured responses, tailored to provide effective action that is not likely to further justify the actions on the part of extremists. That is what is necessary. And sometimes that can be more defensive in nature rather than purely offensive.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, as much as we have enjoyed your comments and your questions, it is time to conclude. But I request you to please keep your thinking caps on, as the interaction can carry on later over lunch as well. May I now request our chief guest, Captain Amarinder Singh, to present a token of remembrance to Dr. Peter Chalk. Thank you, sir. I now call upon Shri Dinkar Gupta, DGP Punjab, to present a token of our gratitude to our chief guest. Thank you, sir. May I now request Mr. Gaurav Yadav, Additional DG Administration, to kindly propose the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Anita. On behalf of Punjab Police and the Director General, it's my proud privilege to propose a vote of thanks. I thank Mrs. KPS Gill and the entire Gill family for being here. You are a source of strength to us. I thank the Chief Minister, who has been the driving force behind this memorial lecture series. It was his inspiration and his idea last year when Mr. Arora had launched it. The Chief Minister, besides being a military historian par excellence, has given us many insights into Mr. Gill's strength of character and his leadership today. Thank you, sir, for your speech. I thank Dr. Chalk for an extremely illuminating talk, and going by the invigorating question and answer session, I must say that it's a success, sir. Thank you very much. I must thank Dr. Nachal Sandhu, former Deputy NSA Director IB, who's amongst us. I thank the Director Generals of Police of Haryana and Chandigarh. I thank the Director Indian School of Business, who's here, for hosting us, for providing us this opportunity. I thank the galaxy of retired police officers and senior officers who are here. I must acknowledge and thank the presence of Mr. Ramesh Vinayak, who's the National Editor of Hindustan Times. Thank you, sir, for being here. I thank Dr. Swarajveer Singh, who's here. Also, he's a former police officer, and he's attended this lecture today. I thank for the information of Dr. Chalk. We have around 250 cutting-edge police officers here, young sub-inspectors and deputy superintendents of police, who have been specially called here to attend your lecture, and I'm sure they must have gained a lot by this lecture today. I thank the print and electronic media, and in the end, I would request everyone to kindly join us for lunch. Thank you very much.